The Arabian Nights Part 3. Morning now dawned on Shahrazad, and she broke off from what she had been allowed to say. Then, when it was the 8th night, she continued. I have heard, O auspicious king, that the young man said, I struck the slave with the intention of cutting off his head, but I had failed to sever his jugular and only cut his gullet, skin, and flesh. He let out a loud snort, and as my wife stirred, I stepped back, returned the sword to its sheath and went back to the city, where I entered the palace and lay down on my bed until morning. There was my wife coming to and lay down on my bed until morning. There was my wife coming to wake me, with her hair shorn, wearing mourning. She said, Cousin, don't object to what I am doing, as I have had news that my mother has died and that my father has been killed fighting the infidels, while one of my brothers has died of a fatal sting and the other of a fall. It is right for me to weep and grieve. When I heard this, I did not tell her what I knew, but said, Do what you think proper and I shall not oppose you. From the beginning to the end of a whole year she remained miserable and in mourning, and then she said to me, I want you to build me a tomb shaped like a dome beside your palace, which I shall set aside for grief and call the House of Sorrows. Do as you please, I said, and she built her House of Sorrows, over which a dome was, covering what looked like a tomb. She brought the slave there and installed him in it, but he could no longer be of any service to her. He went on drinking wine, but since the day that I had wounded him he could no longer speak, and he was alive only because his allotted span had not yet come to an end. Every day, morning and evening, my wife would go to the tomb weeping and lamenting for him, and she would give him wine and broth. Things went on like this until it came to the 2nd year. I had been long suffering and had paid no attention to her, until one day, when I came to her room unexpectedly, I found her exclaiming tearfully, Why are you absent from my sight, my heart's delight? Talk to me, O my soul, speak to me, my darling. She recited. If you have found consolation, love has left me no endurance. My heart loves none but you. Take my bones and my soul with you wherever you may go. Take my bones and my soul with you wherever you may go. And where you halt, bury me opposite you. Call out my name over my grave and my bones will moan in answer, hearing the echo of your voice. Then she went on. My wishes are fulfilled on the day I am near you, while the day of my doom is when you turn from me. I may pass the night in fear, threatened with destruction. But union with you is sweeter to me than safety. Next she recited. If every blessing in all this world were mine, together with the empire of the Persian kings, to me this would not be worth a gnat's wing. If my eyes could not look on you. When she had finished speaking and weeping, I said to her, Cousin, that is enough of sorrow, and more weeping will do you no good. Do not try to stop me doing what I must do, she said, for in that case, I shall kill myself. I said no more and left her to do what she wanted, and she went on grieving, weeping, and mourning for a 2nd year and then a 3rd. One day, I went to her when something had put me out of temper and I was tired of the violence of her distress. I found her going towards the tomb beneath the dome, saying, Master, I hear no word from you. Master, why don't you answer me? Then she recited, From you. Master, why don't you answer me? Then she recited. Grave, grave, have the beloved's beauties faded? And has the brightness and the radiance gone? Grave, you are neither earth nor heaven for me. So how is it you hold both sun and moon? When I heard what she said and the lines she recited, I became even angrier than before and I exclaimed, How long will this sorrow last? Then I recited myself. Grave, grave, has his blackness faded? And has the brightness and the foulness failed? Grave, you are neither basin nor a pot. So how is it you hold charcoal and slime? When she heard this, she jumped up and said, Damn you, you dog! It was you who did this to me and wounded my heart's darling. You have caused me pain and robbed him of his youth, so that for 3 years he has been neither dead nor alive. To which I replied, Dirty whore, filthiest of the fornicators and the prostitutes of black slaves, yes, it was I who did that. Then I drew my sword and aimed a deadly blow at her, but when she heard what I said and saw that I was intending to kill her, she burst out laughing and said, "Off, you dog! What is past cannot return and the dead cannot rise again, but God has given the man who did this to me into my power. Because of him there has been an unquenchable fire in my heart and a flame that cannot be hidden." Then, as she stood there, she spoke some unintelligible words and then, as she stood there, she spoke some unintelligible words and added, "Through my magic become half stone and half man." It was then that I became as you see me now, unable to stand or to sit, neither dead nor alive. After this, she cast a spell over the whole city, together with its markets and its gardens. It had contained 4 different groups, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Magians, and these she transformed into fish, 1/4 the white fish being the Muslims, the red the Magians, the blue the Christians and the yellow the Jews 1/4, and she transformed the 4 islands into 4 mountains that surround the pool. Every day she tortures me by giving me 100 lashes with her whip until the blood flows down over my shoulders. Then she dresses me in a hair shirt of the kind that I am wearing on my upper half, over which she places this splendid gown. The young man then wept and recited, "Oh my God, I must endure your judgment and decree. And if that pleases you, I shall do this. Tyrants have wronged me and oppressed me here. But paradise may be my recompense. My sufferings have left me in sad straits. But God's choice as his favored prophet intercedes for me." The king then turned to the youth and said, "Although you have freed me from one worry, you have added another to my cares. Where is the woman and where is the tomb with the wounded slave?" "He is lying in his tomb beneath the dome," said the young man, "and she is in that chamber opposite the door. She comes out once each day at sunrise, and the first thing she does is to strip me and give me 100 lashes. I weep and call out but I cannot move to defend myself, and after she has tortured me, she takes wine and broth to the slave. She will come early tomorrow by God." "Young man," said the king, "I shall do you a service for which I shall be remembered and which will be recorded until the end of time." He then sat talking to him until nightfall, when they both slept. Close to dawn the king rose, stripped off his clothes, drew his sword and went to where the slave lay, surrounded by candles, lamps, perfumes and unguents. He came up to the slave and killed him with one blow, before lifting him onto his back and throwing him down a well in the palace. After that, he wrapped himself in the slave's clothes and lay down in the tomb with the naked sword by his side. After an hour, the damned sorceress arrived, but before she entered the tomb, she first stripped her cousin of his clothes, took a whip and beat him. He cried out in pain, "The state that I am in is punishment enough for me. Cousin, have pity on me." "Did you have pity on me?" she asked, "and did you leave me, my beloved?" She beat him until she was tired and the blood flowed down his sides, then she dressed him in a hair shirt under his robe, and went off to carry the slave a cup of wine and a bowl of broth. At the tomb she wept and wailed, saying, "Master, speak to me, Master, talk to me." She then recited, "How long will you turn away, treating me roughly? Have I not shed tears enough for you? How do you intend abandoning me? If your object is the envious, their envy has been cured." Shedding tears, she repeated, "Master, talk to me." The king lowered his voice, twisted his tongue, and speaking in the accent of the blacks, he said, "Oh, oh, there is no might and no power except with God, the exalted, the omnipotent." When she heard this, she cried out with joy and then fainted. When she had recovered, she said, "Master, is this true?" The king, in a weak voice, said, "You damned woman, do you deserve that anyone should talk to you or speak with you?" "Why is that?" she asked. "Because all day long you torture your husband, although he cries for help, and from dusk to dawn he stops me from sleeping as he calls out his entreaties, cursing both me and you. He disturbs me and harms me, and but for this I would have been cured. It is this that keeps me from answering you with your permission." She replied, "I shall release him." "Do that," said the king, "and allow me to rest." "I hear and obey," she replied, and, after going from the tomb to the palace, she took a bowl, filled it with water and spoke some words over it. As the water boiled and bubbled, like a pot boiling on the fire, she sprinkled her husband with it and said, "I conjure you by the words that I have recited, if you are in this state because of my magic, revert from this shape to what you were before." A sudden shudder ran through the young man and he rose to his feet, overjoyed at his release, calling out, "I bear witness that there is no God but God and that Muhammad is the apostle of God. 1/4 My God bless him and give him peace." His wife shouted at him, saying, "Go, and don't come back, or else I shall kill you." He left her and she went back to the tomb, where she said, "Master, come out to me, so that I may see your beautiful form." In a weak voice the king replied, "What have you done? You have brought me relief from the branch but not from the root, my beloved, my black darling." She said, "What is the root? Curse you, you beloved, my black darling." She said, "What is the root? Curse you, you damned woman." He replied, "It is the people of the city and of the 4 islands. Every night at midnight the fish raise their heads asking for help and cursing me and you. It is this that stops my recovery. Go and free them quickly and then come back, take my hand and help me to get up, for I am on the road to recovery." On hearing these words and thinking that he was the slave, the sorceress was delighted and promised in God's name willingly to obey his command. She got up and ran joyfully to the pool, from which she took a little water. Morning now dawned and Shahrazad broke off from what she had been allowed to say. Then when it was the 9th night, she continued, "I have heard, O auspicious king, that after the sorceress had taken water from the pool and spoken some unintelligible words over it, the fish danced, lifted their heads and immediately rose up, as the magic spell was removed from the city. It became inhabited again, the merchants buying and selling and each man practicing his craft, while the islands were restored to their former state. The sorceress went straight away to the tomb and said to the king, 'Give me your noble hand, my darling, and get up.' In a low voice, the king replied, 'Come to me.' When she did this he, with the drawn sword in his hand, struck her in the breast as she clung on to him, so that it emerged gleaming from her back. With another blow he cut her in 2, and threw the 2 halves on the ground. When he came out he found the young man whom she had enchanted standing waiting for him, congratulating him on his escape, kissing his hand and thanking him. The king asked him whether he would prefer to stay in his own city, or to go with him to his. "King of the age," said the young man, "do you know how long a journey it is to your city?" 2.5 days, replied the king. "If you have been sleeping," said the young man, "wake up. Between you and your city is a full year's worth of hard travelling. You only got here in 2.5 days because this place was under a spell. But I shall not part from you for the blink of an eye." The king was glad and said, "Praise be to God, who has given you to me. You shall be my son, for all my life I have been granted no other." They embraced with great joy and then walked to the palace. Here the young man told his courtiers to make ready for a journey and to collect supplies and whatever was needed. This took 10 days, after which the young man and the king set off, the latter being in a fever of anxiety to get back his own city. They travelled with 50 Mamluks and magnificent gifts, and their journey continued day and night for a whole year until, as God had decreed their safety, they eventually reached their goal. Word was sent to the vizier that the king had arrived safe and sound, and he, together with his soldiers, who had despaired of him, came to greet him, kissing the ground before him and congratulating him on his safe arrival. The king then entered the city to take his seat on his throne, and the vizier, on presenting himself and hearing of all that had happened to the young man, added his own congratulations. Then, when things were settled, the king presented gifts to many people and he told the vizier to fetch the man who had brought him the fish and who had been responsible for saving the people of the enchanted city. A messenger was sent to him and when he was brought to the palace, the king presented him with robes of honor and asked him about his circumstances, and whether he had any children. The fisherman replied that he had 2 daughters and 1 son. The king sent for them and married one of the girls himself, giving the other to the young man. The fisherman's son was made treasurer, while the vizier was invested and sent off as ruler of the capital of the Black Islands, the young man's city. With him were sent the 50 Mamluks who had come with the king, and he was given robes of honor to take to the emirs of the city. He kissed the king's hands and started out immediately, while the king remained with the young man. The fisherman, meanwhile, had become the richest man of his age, while his daughters remained as wives of kings until they died. This, however, is not more remarkable than what happened to the porter. There was an unmarried porter who lived in the city of Baghdad. One day, while he was standing in the market, leaning on his basket, a woman came up to him wrapped in a silken masulai shawl with a floating ribbon and wearing embroidered shoes fringed with gold thread. When she raised her veil, beneath it could be seen dark eyes which, with their eyelashes and eyelids, shot soft glances, perfect in their quality. She turned to the porter and said in a sweet, clear voice, "Take your basket and follow me." Almost before he was sure of what she had said, he rushed to pick up the basket. "What a lucky day, a day of good fortune," he exclaimed, following her until she stopped by the door of a house. She knocked at it and a Christian came down to whom she gave a dinar, taking in exchange an olive-colored jar of strained wine. She put this in taking in exchange an olive-colored jar of strained wine. She put this in the basket and said to the porter, "Pick this up and follow me by God," repeated the porter, "this is a blessed and a fortunate day," and he did what she told him. She then stopped at a fruiterer's shop, where she bought Syrian apples, Uthmani quinces, Omani peaches, jasmine and water lilies from Syria, autumn cucumbers, lemons, sultani oranges, scented myrtle, privet flowers, chamomile blossoms, red anemones, violets, pomegranate blooms and eglantine. All these she put into the porter's basket, telling him to pick it up. This he did and he followed her until she stopped at the butcher's, where she got the man to cut her 10 rattles weight of meat. He did this, and after paying him, she wrapped the meat in banana leaves and put it in the basket, giving the porter his instructions. He picked up the basket and followed her to the grocer, from whom she bought pistachio kernels for making a dessert, tahama raisins and shelled almonds. The porter was told to pick them up and to follow her. Next she stopped at the sweetmeat seller's shop. This time she bought a bowl and filled it with all that he had: 1/4 sugar cakes, donuts stuffed with musk, soap cakes, lemon tarts, maimuni tarts, Zainab's combs, sugar fingers and Qadi's snacks. Every type of pastry was piled onto a plate and put into the basket, at which the porter exclaimed, "If you had told me, I'd have brought a donkey with me to carry all this stuff." The girl smiled and gave him a cuff on the back of the neck. "Hurry up," she said. "Don't talk so much and you will get your reward, if God Almighty wills it." Then she stopped at the perfume seller's where she bought 10 types of scented water, 1/4 including rose water, orange flower water, waters scented with water lilies and with willow flowers, 1/4 2 sugar loaves, a bottle of musk-scented rose water, a quantity of frankincense, aloes, ambergris, musk, and Alexandrian candles. These entire she put in the basket, telling the porter to pick it up and follow her. He carried his basket and followed her to a handsome house, overlooking a spacious courtyard. It was a tall, pillared building, whose door had 2 ebony leaves, plated with red gold. The girl halted by the door, raised the veil from her face and knocked lightly, while the porter remained standing behind her, his thoughts occupied with her beauty. The door opened and, as its leaves parted, the porter looked at the person who had opened it. He saw a lady of medium height, with jutting breasts, beautiful, comely, and resplendent, with a perfect and well-proportioned figure, a radiant brow, red cheeks, and eyes rivaling those of a wild cow or a gazelle. Her eyebrows were like the crescent moon of the month of Shaban, she had cheeks like red anemones, a mouth like the seal of Solomon, coral red lips, teeth like chamomile blossoms or pearls on a string, and a gazelle-like neck. Her bosom was like an ornate fountain, with breasts like twin pomegranates. She had an elegant belly and a navel that could contain an ounce of unguent. She was as the poet described. Look at the sun and the moon of the palaces. At the jewel in her nose and at her flowery splendor. Your eye has not seen white on black. United in beauty as in her face and in her hair. She is rosy-cheeked, beauty proclaims her name. Even if you are not fortunate enough to know of her. She swayed and I laughed in wonder at her haunches. She swayed and I laughed in wonder at her haunches. But her waist prompted my tears. As the porter stared at her, he lost his wits and the basket almost fell from his head. Never in my life, he repeated, have I known a more blessed day than this. The girl who had answered the door said to the other, who had brought the provisions, come in and take the basket from this poor porter. So the two girls went in, followed by the porter, and they went on until they reached a spacious, well-designed and beautiful courtyard, with additional carvings, vaulted chambers and alcoves, and furnished with sofas, wardrobes, cupboards, and curtains. In the middle of it was a large pool filled with water on which floated a skiff, and at its upper end was a couch of juniper wood studded with gems over which was suspended a mosquito net of red satin, the buttons of whose fastenings were pearls as big as or bigger than hazelnuts. From within this emerged a resplendent girl of pleasing beauty, glorious as the moon, with the character of a philosopher. Her eyes were bewitching, with eyebrows like bent bows, her figure was slender and straight as the letter olive, her breath had the scent of ambergris, her lips were carnelian red, sweet as sugar, and her face would shame the light of the radiant sun. She was like one of the stars of heaven, a golden dome, an unveiled bride or a noble Bedouin lady, as described by the poet. It is as though she smiles to show stringed pearls, hailstones or flowers of chamomile. The locks of her hair hang black as night, while her beauty shames the light of dawn. While her beauty shames the light of dawn. This third girl rose from the couch and walked slowly to join her sisters in the center of the hall. Why are you standing here? She said. Take the basket from the head of this poor porter. The provision buyer or housekeeper came first, followed by the doorkeeper, and the third girl helped them to lower the basket, after which they emptied out its contents and put everything in its place. Then they gave the porter 2 dinars and told him to be off. For his part, he looked at the lovely girls, the most beautiful he had ever seen, with their equally delightful natures. There were no men with them and, as he stared in astonishment at the wine, the fruits, the scented blossoms and all the rest, he was reluctant to leave. Why don't you go? Asked the girl. Do you think that we didn't pay you enough? And with that, she turned to her sister and said, Give him another dinar by God, lady, said the porter, it was not that I thought that the payment was too little, for my fee would not come to 2 dirhams, but you have taken over my heart and soul. How is it that you are alone with no men here and no pleasant companion? You know that there must be 4 to share a proper feast and women cannot enjoy themselves except with men. As the poet says. Do you not see that 4 things join for entertainment 1/4? Harp, lute, zither and pipe. Matched by 4 scented flowers 1/4. Rose, myrtle, gillyflower, anemone. These only become pleasant with another 4 1/4. Wine, gardens, a beloved and some gold. There are 3 of you and so you need a 4th, who must be a man of there are 3 of you and so you need a 4th, who must be a man of intelligence, sensible, clever and one who can keep a secret. The 3 girls were surprised by what the porter said, and they laughed at him and asked, Who can produce us a man like that? We are girls and are afraid of entrusting our secrets to someone who would not keep them. We have read in an account what the poet Ibn al-Thumam once said. Guard your secret as you can, entrusting it to none. For if you do, you will have let it go. If your own breast cannot contain your secret, how is it to be held by someone else? And Abu Nuwas has said, Whoever lets the people know his secret, deserves a brand imprinted on his forehead. When the porter heard what they said, he exclaimed, By God, I am an intelligent and a trustworthy man, I have read books and studied histories, I make public what is good and conceal what is bad. As the poet says, only the trustworthy can keep a secret. And it is with the good that secrets are concealed. With me they are kept locked inside a room, whose keys are lost and whose door has been sealed. When the girls heard this quotation, they said, "You know that we have spent a great deal of money on this place. Do you have anything with you which you can use to pay us back? We shall not let you sit with us as our companion and to look on our comely and beautiful faces until you pay down some money. Have you not heard what the author of the proverb said? Love without cash is worthless." The doorkeeper said, "My dear, if you have something, you are someone, but if you have nothing, then go without anything." At that point, however, the housekeeper said, "Sisters, let him be. For, by God, he has not failed us today, whereas someone else might not have put up with us, and whatever debt he may run up, I will settle for him." The porter was delighted and thanked her, kissing the ground, but the girl who had been on the couch said, "By God, we shall only let you sit with us on one condition, which is that you ask no questions about what does not concern you, and if you are inquisitive you will be beaten." "I agree, lady," said the porter. "I swear by my head and my eye, and here I am, a man with no tongue." The housekeeper then got up, tucked up her skirts, set out the wine bottles and strained the wine. She set green herbs beside the wine jar and brought everything that might be needed. She then brought out the wine jar and sat down with her two sisters, while the porter, sitting between the three of them, thought he must be dreaming. From the wine jar that she had fetched she filled a cup, drank it, and followed it with a second and a third. Then she filled the cup and passed it to her sister and finally to the porter. She recited, "Drink with pleasure and the enjoyment of good health. For this wine is a cure for all disease. For this wine is a cure for all disease." The porter took the cup in his hand, bowed, thanked her and recited, "Wine should be drunk beside a trusted friend. One of pure birth from the line of old heroes. For wine is like the wind, sweet if it passes scented flowers, but stinking if it blows over a corpse." Then he added, "Take wine only from a fawn. Subtle in meaning when she speaks to you, resembling the wine itself." After he had recited these lines, he kissed the hand of each of the girls. Then he drank until he became tipsy, after which he swayed and recited, "The only blood we are allowed to drink is blood that comes from grapes. So pour this out for me, and may my life, and all I have, both new and old, serve to ransom your gazelle-like eyes." Then the housekeeper took the cup, filled it and gave it to the doorkeeper, who took it from him with thanks and drank it. She then filled it for the lady of the house, before pouring another cup and passing it to the porter, who kissed the ground in front of her, thanked her and recited, "Fetch wine, by God, bring me the brimming glass. Pour it for me, this is the water of life." He then went up to the mistress of the house and said, "Lady, I am your slave, your mamluk, and your servant." He recited, "By the door there stands a slave of yours, acknowledging your kindly charity. May he come in, fair one, to see your loveliness? I swear by love itself I cannot leave." She replied, "Enjoy yourself, drink with pleasure and the well-being that follows the path of health." He took the cup, kissed her hand and chanted, "I gave her old wine, colored like her cheeks, unmixed and gleaming like a fiery brand." She kissed it and said, laughingly, "How can you pour us people's cheeks?" I said, "Drink, this comes from my tears. Its redness is my blood. My breath has heated it within the glass." She replied with the line, "Companion, if you have wept blood for me, pour it obediently for me to drink." She then took the cup, drank it and sat down with her sister. They continued to drink, with the porter seated between them, and as they drank they danced, laughed and sang, reciting poems and lyrics. The porter began to play with them, kissing, biting, rubbing, feeling, touching and taking liberties. One of them would give him morsels to eat, another would cuff him and slap him, and the third would bring him scented flowers. With them he was enjoying the pleasantest of times, as though he was seated among the houris of paradise. They went on in this way until the wine had taken its effect on their heads and their brains. When it had got the upper hand of them, the doorkeeper stood up, stripped off her clothes until she was naked, and letting down her hair as a veil, she jumped into the pool. She sported in the water, ducking her head and then spitting out the water, after which she took some in her mouth and spat it over the porter. She washed her limbs and between her thighs, after which she came out from the water and threw herself down on his lap. "My master, my darling, what is the name of this?" she said, pointing to her vagina. "Your womb," he replied. "Oh," she said. "Have you no shame?" and she seized him by the neck and started to cuff him. "Your vagina," he said, and she cuffed him again on the back of his neck, saying, "Oh! Oh! How disgusting! Aren't you ashamed, your vulva?" he replied. "Do you feel no shame for your honor?" and she struck him a blow with her hand. "Your hornet," he said, at which the lady of the house pounced on him and beat him, saying, "Don't speak like that." With every new name that he produced, the girls beat him more and more, until the back of his neck had almost dissolved under their slaps. More, until the back of his neck had almost dissolved under their slaps. They were laughing among themselves, until he asked, "What do you call it, then?" "The mint of the dikes," replied the doorkeeper. "Thank God, I am safe now," said the porter. "Good for you, mint of the dikes." Then the wine was passed round again, and the housekeeper got up, took off her clothes and threw herself onto the porter's lap. "What is this called, light of my eyes?" she asked, pointing at her private parts. "Your vagina," he said. "Oh, how dirty of you!" she exclaimed, and she struck him a blow that resounded around the hall, adding, "Oh! Oh! Have you no shame, the mint of the dikes?" he said, but blows and slaps still rained on the back of his neck. He tried another 4 names, but the girls kept on saying, "No, no, the mint of the dikes," he repeated, and they laughed so much that they fell over backwards. Then they fell to beating his neck, saying, "No, that's not its name." He said, "Oh my sisters, what is it called?" "Husked sesame," they said. Then the housekeeper put her clothes back on and they sat, drinking together, with the porter groaning at the pain in his neck and shoulders. After the wine had been passed round again, the lady of the house, the most beautiful of the 3, stood up and stripped off her clothes. The porter grasped the back of his neck with his hand and massaged it, saying, "My neck and my shoulders are common property." When the girl was naked, she jumped into the pool, dived under water, played around and washed herself. To the porter in her nakedness she looked like a sliver of the moon, with a face like the full moon when it rises or the dawn when it breaks. He looked at her figure, her breasts and her heavy buttocks as they swayed, while she was naked as her Lord had created her. "Oh! Oh!" he said, and he recited. "If I compare your figure to a sappy branch, I load my heart with wrongs and with injustice. Branches are most beautiful when concealed with leaves, while you are loveliest when we meet you naked." On hearing these lines, the girl came out of the pool and sat on the porter's lap. She pointed at her vulva and said, "Little master, what is the name of this?" "The mint of the dikes," he replied, and when she exclaimed in disgust, he tried the husked sesame. "Bah!" she said. "Your womb," he suggested. "Oh! Oh! Aren't you ashamed?" and she slapped the back of his neck. Whatever name he produced, she slapped him, saying, "No, no," until he asked, "Sisters, what is it called?" "The Khan of Abu Mansur," they replied. "Praise God that I have reached safety at last," he said. "Ho for the Khan of Abu Mansur!" The girl got up and put on her clothes and they all went back to what they had been doing. For a time the wine circulated among them and the porter then got up, undressed and went into the pool. The girls looked at him swimming in the water and washing under his beard and beneath his armpits, as they had done. Then he came out and threw himself into the lap of the lady of the house, with his arms in the lap of the doorkeeper and his feet and legs in the lap of the girl who had bought the provisions. Then he pointed to his penis and said, "Ladies, what is the name of this?" They all laughed at this until they fell over backwards. "Your zoob, one of them suggested. "No," he said, and he bit each of them. "Your heir," they said, but he repeated no, and embraced each of them. Morning now dawned and Shahrazad broke off from what she had been allowed to say. Then, when it was the 10th night, her sister Dunyazad said, "Finish your story with pleasure," she replied, and she continued. "I have heard, O fortunate king, that the girls produced 3 names for the porter, while he kissed, bit and embraced them until he was satisfied. They went on laughing until they said, 'What is its name, then, brother, don't you know?' 'No, this is the mule that breaks barriers, browses on the mint of the dikes, eats the husked sesame and that passes the night in the Khan of Abu Mansur.' The girls laughed until they fell over backwards and then they continued with their drinking party, carrying on until nightfall. At this point, they told the porter that it was time for him to get up, put on his gaiters and go 1/4. "Show us the width of your shoulders, by God," said the porter, "if the breath of life were to leave me, it would be easier for me to bear than having to part from you. Let me link night with day, and in the morning we can all go our separate ways." The girl who had bought the provisions pleaded with the others, "Let him sleep here so that we can laugh at him. Who knows whether in all our lives we shall meet someone else like him, both wanton and witty." They then said, "You can only spend the night with us on condition that you accept our authority and that you don't ask about anything you see or the reason for it." The porter agreed to this, and they then told him, "Get up and read what is written over the door." He went to the door and there he found written above it in gold leaf, "Whoever talks about what does not concern him will hear what will not please him. I call you to witness," he said, "that I shall not talk about what is no concern of mine." "Witness," he said, "that I shall not talk about what is no concern of mine." The housekeeper got up and prepared a meal for them, which they ate, and then they lit candles and lamps, dipping ambergris and aloes into the candles. They sat drinking and talking of past loves, after having reset the table with fresh fruits and more wine. They continued for a time, eating, drinking, carousing together over their dessert, laughing and teasing each other, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. This did not disrupt the party, however, and one of the girls went by herself to the door and returned to report, "Our happiness is complete tonight." "How is that?" the others asked. She told them, "At the door are 3 Persian dervishes, with shaven chins, heads and eyebrows. By a very remarkable coincidence, each of them has lost his left eye. They have only just arrived after a journey, they are showing the signs of travel and this is the first time that they have been to our city, Baghdad. They knocked on our door because they couldn't find a lodging for the night and they had said to themselves, 'Perhaps the owner of this house would give us the key to a stable or to a hut in which we could pass the night.' For they had been caught out by nightfall, and, being strangers, they had no acquaintance who might give them shelter." 1/4 And, sisters, each of them is of a ludicrous appearance. She continued to persuade and cajole until the others agreed to let the Persians come in on condition that they would not talk about what did not concern them lest they hear what would not please them. The girl went off joyfully and came back with the 3 one-eyed men, with shaven beards and mustaches. They spoke words of greeting, bowed and hung back. The girls got up to welcome them and, after congratulating them on their safe arrival, told them to be seated. What the visitors saw was a pleasant and clean room, furnished with greenery, where there were lighted candles, incense rising into the air, dessert, fruits and wine, together with 3 virgin girls. "This is good, by God," they all agreed. Then they turned to the porter and found him cheerfully tired out and drunk. They thought, on seeing him, that he must be one of their own kinds and said, "This is a dervish like us, either a foreigner or an Arab." Hearing this, the porter glowered at them and said, "Sit down and don't be inquisitive. Didn't you read what is written over the door? It is not for poor men who arrive like you to let loose your tongues at us." The newcomers apologized submissively, and the girls laughed and made peace between them and the porter, after which food was produced for the new arrivals, which they ate. They then sat drinking together, with the doorkeeper pouring the wine and the wine cup circulating among them. The porter then asked the visitors whether they had some story or anecdote to tell. Heated by wine, they, in their turn, asked for musical instruments and were brought a tambourine, a lute and a Persian harp by the doorkeeper. They then got up and tuned the instruments, after which each one took one of them, struck a note and began to sing. The girls added a shrill accompaniment and the noise rose. Then, while this was going on, there was a knock at the door and the doorkeeper got up to see what was going on. The reason for this knocking was that the Caliph Harun al-Rashid was in the habit of going around disguised as a merchant, and he had come down from his palace that night on an excursion to listen to the latest news, accompanied by his vizier, Jafar, and Masroor, his executioner. On his way through the city, he and his companions had happened to pass that house, where they heard music and singing. He had said to Jafar, "I want to go in here so that we may listen to these voices and see their owners." Jafar had replied, "Commander of the faithful, these people are drunk and I am afraid that they may do us some harm." The Caliph had then said, "I must enter and I want you to think of some scheme to get us in. To hear is to obey," Jafar had replied, before going up and knocking on the door. When it was opened by the doorkeeper, Jafar advanced and kissed the ground. "Lady," he said, "we are traders from Tiberias who have been in Baghdad for 10 days. We have sold our goods and are staying at the merchant's khan, but this evening we were invited out by a colleague. We went to his house and, after he had given us a meal, we sat drinking with him for a time, but when he let us go night had fallen and, as we are strangers here, we could not find our way back to our hostel. Of your charity, and may God reward you, would you let us come in and spend the night with you?" The girl looked at them and saw that they were dressed as merchants and appeared to be respectable people. So she went back to her sisters and passed on Jafar's message. The others sympathized with the visitor's plight and told her, "Let them in," after which she went back and opened the door. The Caliph, Jafar, and Masroor came in, and when the girls saw them, they stood up, seated their visitors and ministered to their needs, saying, "Welcome to our guests, but we lay a condition on you." "What is that?" they asked. "That you do not speak of what does not concern you, lest you hear what will not please you." "We agree," they replied, and they sat down to drink together. Looking at the 3 dervishes, the Caliph was surprised to find that each of them had lost his left eye. He was also thrown into confusion by the beauty and grace of the girls, which prompted his admiration. They began to drink together and to talk, but when the girls invited the Caliph began to drink together and to talk, but when the girls invited the Caliph to drink, he said, "I am proposing to go on the pilgrimage to Mecca." The doorkeeper then got up and brought him an embroidered tablecloth on which she set a china jar in which she poured willow flower water, adding some snow and a sugar lump. The Caliph thanked her and said to himself, "By God, I shall reward her tomorrow for the good that she has done me." Then they all occupied themselves with drinking, and when the drink had gained the upper hand, the lady of the house got up, bowed to the company and then, taking the housekeeper by the hand, she said, "Sisters, come, we must settle our debt." "Yes," agreed the other 2 girls, and at that, the doorkeeper got up in front of them and first cleared the table, removed the debris, replaced the perfumes and cleared a space in the middle of the room. The dervishes were made to sit on a bench on one side of the room and the Caliph, Jafar, and Masroor on a bench on the other side. Then the lady of the house called to the porter, "Your friendship does not amount to much. You are not a stranger, but one of the household." The porter got up, tightened his belt and asked, "What do you want?" "Stay where you are," she said. Then the housekeeper stood up and set a chair in the middle of the room, opened a cupboard and said to the porter, "Come and help me." In the cupboard he saw 2 black bitches, with chains around their necks. "Take them," said the girl, and he took them and brought them to the center of the room. Then the lady of the house got up, rolled back her sleeves and took up a whip. "Bring one of them," she told the porter, and he did this, pulling the bitch by its chain, as it whimpered and shook its head at the girl. It howled as she struck it on the head, and she continued to beat it until her arms were tired. She then threw away the continued to beat it until her arms were tired. She then threw away the whip, pressed the bitch to her breast and wiped away its tears with her hand, kissing its head. Then she said to the porter, "Take this one away and bring the other." This he did and she treated the second bitch in the same way as the first. The Caliph was concerned and troubled by this. Unable to contain his curiosity about the story of the two bitches, he winked at Jafar, but the latter turned to him and gestured to him to remain silent. Then the lady of the house turned to the doorkeeper and said, "Get up and do your duty." "Yes," she replied, and, getting up, she went to the couch, which was made of juniper wood with panels of gold and silver. Then the lady of the house said to the other two girls, "Bring out what you have." The doorkeeper sat on a chair by her side, while the housekeeper went into a closet and came out with a satin bag with green fringes and 2 golden discs. She stood in front of the lady of the house, unfastened the bag and took from it a lute whose strings she tuned and whose pegs she tightened, until it was all in order. Then she recited, "You are the object of my whole desire. Union with you, beloved, is unending bliss. While absence from you is like fire. You madden me, and throughout time. In you is centered the infatuation of my love. It brings me no disgrace that I love you. The veils that cover me are torn away by love. And love continues shamefully to rend all veils. I clothe myself in sickness, my excuse is clear. For through my love, you lead my heart astray. For through my love, you lead my heart astray. Flowing tears serve to bring my secret out and make it plain. The tearful flood reveals it, and they try to cure the violence of this sickness, but it is you who are for me both the disease and its cure. For those whose cure you are, the pains last long. I pine away through the light shed by your eyes. And it is my own love whose sword kills me. A sword that has destroyed many good men. Love has no end for me, nor can I turn to consolation. Love is my medicine and my code of law. Secretly and openly it serves to adorn me. You bring good fortune to the eye that looks its fill on you, or manages a glance. Yes, and its choice of love distracts my heart." When the lady of the house heard these lines, she cried, "Oh! Oh! Oh!" tore her clothes and fell to the ground in a faint. The Caliph was astonished to see weals caused by the blows of a whip on her body, but then the doorkeeper got up, sprinkled water over her and clothed her in a splendid dress that she had fetched for her sister. When they saw that, all the men present were disturbed, as they had no idea what lay behind it. The Caliph said to Jafar, "Don't you see this girl and the marks of a beating that she shows? I can't keep quiet without knowing the truth of the matter and without finding out about this girl and the 2 black bitches." Jafar replied, "Master, they made it a condition that we should not talk about what did not concern us, lest we hear what we do not like." At this point, the doorkeeper said, "Sister, keep your promise and come to me willingly," said the housekeeper, and she took the lute, cradled it to her breasts, touched it with her fingers and recited, "If I complain of the beloved's absence, what am I to say? Where can I go to reach what I desire? I might send messengers to explain my love. But this complaint no messenger can carry. I may endure, but after he has lost his love, the lover's life is short. Nothing remains but sorrow and then grief, with tears that flood the cheeks. You may be absent from my sight, but you have still a settled habitation in my heart. I wonder, do you know our covenant? Like flowing water, it does not stay long. Have you forgotten that you loved a slave who finds his cure in tears and wasted flesh? Ah, if this love unites us once again! I have a long complaint to make to you." When the doorkeeper heard this second poem, she cried out and said, "That is good, by God." Then she put her hand to her clothes and tore them, as the first girl had done, and fell to the ground in a faint. The housekeeper got up and, after sprinkling her with water, clothed her in a new dress. The doorkeeper then rose and took her seat before saying, "Give me more and pay off the debt you owe me." So the housekeeper brought her lute and recited, "How long will you so roughly turn from me? Have I not poured out tears enough? How long do you plan to abandon me? If this is thanks to those who envy me, their envy has been cured. Were treacherous time to treat a lover fairly, he would not pass the night wakeful and wasted by your love. Treat me with gentleness, your harshness injures me. My sovereign, is it not time for mercy to be shown? To whom shall I tell of my love, you who kill me? How disappointed are the hopes of the one who complains, when faithfulness is in such short supply. My passion for you and my tears increase, while the successive days you shun me are drawn out. Muslims, revenge the lovesick, sleepless man, the pasture of whose patience has scant grass. Does love's code permit you, you who are my desire, to keep me at a distance while another one is honored by your union? What delight or ease can the lover find through nearness to his love, who tries to see that he is weighted down by care? When the doorkeeper heard this poem, she put her hand on her dress and ripped it down to the bottom. She then fell fainting to the ground, showing marks of a beating. The dervishes said, "It would have been better to have slept on a dunghill rather than to have come into this house, where our stay has been clouded by something that cuts at the heart." "Why is that?" asked the caliph, turning to them. "This affair has distressed us," they replied. "Do you not belong to this household?" he asked. "No," they replied. "We have never seen the place before." The caliph was surprised and said, gesturing at the porter, "This man with you may know about them." When they asked him, however, he said, "By Almighty God, love makes us all equal. I have grown up in Baghdad, but this is the only time in my life that I ever entered this house, and how I came to be here with these girls is a remarkable story." The others said, "By God, we thought that you were one of them, but now we see that you are like us." The caliph then pointed out, "We are 7 men and they are 3 women. There is no fourth. So ask them about themselves, and if they don't reply willingly, we will force them to do so." Everyone agreed except for Jafar, who said, "Let them be, we are their guests and they made a condition which we accepted, as you know. It would be best to let the matter rest, for there is only a little of the night left and we can then go on our ways." He winked at the caliph and added, "There is only an hour left and tomorrow we can summon them to your court and ask for their story." The caliph raised his head and shouted angrily, "I cannot bear to wait to hear about them, let the dervishes question them." "I don't agree," said Jafar, and the 2 of them discussed and argued about who should ask the questions until they both agreed that it should be the porter. The lady of the house asked what the noise was about, and the porter got up and said to her, "My lady, these people would like you to tell them the story of the 2 bitches and how you come to beat them and then to weep and kiss them. They also want to know about your sister and why she has been beaten with rods like a man." "These are their and why she has been beaten with rods like a man. These are their questions to you. Is it true what he says about you?" the lady of the house asked the guests, and all of them said yes, except for Jafar, who stayed silent. When the lady heard this, she told them, "By God, you have done us a great wrong. We started by making it a condition that if any of you talked about what did not concern him, he would hear what would not please him. Wasn't it enough for you that we took you into our house and shared our food with you? But the fault is not so much yours as that of the one who brought you into us." Then she rolled her sleeve back above the wrist and struck the floor 3 times, saying, "Hurry." At this, the door of a closet opened and out came 7 black slaves, with drawn swords in their hands. "Tie up these men who talk too much," she said, "and bind them one to the other." This the slaves did, after which they said, "Lady, give us the order to cut off their heads." She replied, "Let them have some time so that I may ask them about their circumstances before their heads are cut off." "God save me," said the porter. "Don't kill me, lady, for someone else's fault. All the rest have done wrong and have committed a fault except me. By God, it would have been a pleasant night had we been saved from these dervishes who entered a prosperous city and then ruined it." He recited, "How good it is when a powerful man forgives, particularly when those forgiven have no helper. By the sanctity of the love we share, do not spoil what came first by what then follows it." When the porter had finished reciting these lines, the girl laughed. Morning now dawned and Shahrazad broke off from what she had been allowed to say. Then, when it was the 11th night, she continued, "I have heard, O auspicious king, that the girl laughed in spite of her anger. She then went up to the men and said, "Tell me about yourselves, for you have no more than 1 hour to live, and were you not people of rank, leaders or governors among your peoples, you would not have been so daring. Damn you, Jafar," the Caliph said. "Tell her about us, or else we shall be killed by mistake, and speak softly to her before we become victims of misfortune. That is part of what you deserve," replied Jafar, but the Caliph shouted at him, "There is a time for joking, but now is when we must be serious." The lady then went to the dervishes and asked them whether they were brothers. "No, by God," they said, "we are only fakirs and foreigners." She next asked one of them whether he had been born one-eyed. "No, by God," he said, "but I have a strange and wonderful story about the loss of my eye, which, were it written with needles on the inner corners of the eyeballs, would serve as a warning to those who take heed." The second and the third dervish, when asked, made the same reply, and they then said, "By God, lady, each of us comes from a different country, and each is the son of a king and is a ruler over lands and subjects." She turned to them and said, "Each of you is to tell his story and explain why he came here, and he can then touch his forelock and go on his way." The first to come forward was the porter, who said, "Lady, I am a porter, and this girl, who bought you your provisions, told me to carry them from the wine cellar to the fruiterer, from the fruiterer to the butcher, from the butcher to the grocer, from the grocer to the sweetmeat seller and the perfumer, and then here. You know what happened to me with you. This is my story, and that's all there is." The girl laughed and said, "Touch your forelock and go." "By God," he said, "I am not going to leave until I have heard the stories of my companions." The first dervish then came forward and said, "Lady, know that the reason why my chin is shaven and my eye has been plucked out is that my father was a king, who had a brother, also a king, who reigned in another city. His son and I were born on the same day. Years later, when we had grown up, I had got into the habit of visiting my uncle every so often, and I would stay with him for some months. My cousin treated me with the greatest generosity, and would kill sheep for me and pour out wine that he strained for me. Once, when we were sitting drinking and were both under the influence of the wine, he said to me, 'Cousin, there is something that I need from you. Please don't refuse to do what I want. I shall obey you with pleasure,' I said. After binding me with the most solemn of oaths, he got up straight away and left for a short while. Back he came then with a lady, veiled, perfumed and wearing the most expensive of clothes, who stood behind him as he turned to me and said, 'Take this woman and go ahead of me to such and such a cemetery, 1/4 a place that I recognized from his description. Take her to the burial enclosure and wait for me there.' Because of the oath that I had sworn, I could not disobey him or refuse his request, and so I went off with the woman and we both went into the enclosure. While we were sitting there, my cousin arrived with a bowl of water, a bag containing plaster, and a carpenter's axe. Taking this axe, he went to a tomb in the middle of the enclosure and started to open it up, moving its stones to one side. Then he used the axe to prod about in the soil of the tomb until he uncovered an iron cover the size of a small door. He raised this, revealing beneath it a vaulted staircase. Turning to the woman, he said, 'Now you can do what you have chosen to do,' at which she went down the stairs. My cousin then looked at me and said, 'In order to complete the favor that you are doing me, when I go down there myself, I ask you to put back the cover and to replace the soil on top of it as it was before. Use the mortar that is in this bag and the water in the bowl to make a paste and coat the circle of the stones in the enclosure so that it looks as it did before, without anyone being able to say, "The inner part is old, but there is a new opening here." I have been working on this for a full year and no one but God knows what I have been doing. This is what I need from you.' He then took his leave of me, wishing me well, and went down the stairs. When he was out of sight, I got up and replaced the cover and followed his instructions, so that the place looked just as it had before. I then went back like a drunken man to the palace of my uncle, who was away hunting. In the morning, after a night's sleep, I thought of what had happened to my cousin the evening before, and, when repentance was of no use, I repented of what I had done and of how I had obeyed him. Thinking that it might have been a dream, I started to ask after my cousin, but nobody could tell me where he was. I went out to the cemetery, looking for the enclosure, but I could not find it. I kept on going round enclosure after enclosure and grave after grave until nightfall, but I still failed in my search. I returned to the palace, but I could neither eat nor drink, for my thoughts were taken up with my cousin, as I did not know how he was, and I was intensely distressed. I passed a troubled night until morning came, when I went for a second time to the cemetery, thinking over what my cousin had done and regretting that I had listened to him. I went round all the enclosures but, to my regret, I still could not find the right one or recognize the grave. For 7 days I went on with my fruitless quest, and my misgivings increased until I was almost driven mad. The only relief I could find was to leave and go back to my father, but as soon as I reached the gate of his city, I was attacked by a group of men who tied me up. I was astonished, seeing that I was the son of the city's ruler and they were my father's servants, and in my alarm I said to myself, what can have happened to my father? I asked my captors why they were doing this. At first they did not answer, but after a time one of them, who had been a servant of mine, said, your father has fallen victim to the treachery of time. The army conspired against him and he was killed by the vizier, who has taken his place. It was on his orders that we were watching out for you. I was stunned by what I heard about my father and fearful because I had a long-standing quarrel with the vizier, before whom my captors now brought me. I had been passionately fond of shooting with a pellet bow and the quarrel arose from this. One day when I was standing on the roof of my palace, a bird settled on the roof of the palace of the vizier. I intended to shoot it, but the pellet missed and, as had been decreed by fate, it struck out the eye of the vizier. This was like the proverb expressed in the old lines. We walked with a pace that was decreed for us. And this is how those under fate's control must walk. A man destined to die in a certain land. A man destined to die in a certain land will not find death in any other. When the vizier lost his eye, he could not say anything because my father was the king of the city, and this was why he was my enemy. When I now stood before him with my hands tied, he ordered my head to be cut off. For what crime do you kill me? I asked. What crime is greater than this? He replied, pointing to his missing eye. I did that by accident, I protested. If you did it by accident, he replied, I am doing this deliberately. Then he said, bring him forward. The guards brought me up in front of him, and sticking his finger into my right eye, the vizier plucked it out, leaving me from that time on one-eyed, as you can see. Then he had me tied up and put in a box, telling the executioner, take charge of him, draw your sword and when you have brought him outside the city, kill him and let the birds and beasts eat him. The executioner took me out of the city to the middle of the desert and then he removed me from the box, bound as I was, hand and foot. He was about to bandage my eyes before going on to kill me, but I wept so bitterly that I moved him to tears. Then, looking at him, I recited. I thought of you as a strong coat of mail, to guard me from the arrows of my foes. But you are now the arrowhead. I pinned my hopes on you in all calamities. When my right hand could no longer aid my left. Leave aside what censurers say. And let my enemies shoot their darts at me. If you do not protect me from my foes. At least your silence neither hurts me nor helps them. There are also other lines. I thought my brothers were a coat of mail. They were, but this was for the enemy. I thought of them as deadly shafts. They were, but their points pierced my heart. The executioner had been in my father's service and I had done him favors, so when he heard these lines, he said, Master, what can I do? I am a slave under command. But then he added, keep your life, but don't come back to this land or else you will be killed and you will destroy me, together with yourself. As one of the poets has said, if you should meet injustice, save your life. And let the house lament its builder. You can replace the country that you leave. But there is no replacement for your life. I wonder at those who live humiliated. When God's earth is so wide. Send out no messenger on any grave affair. For only you yourself will give you good advice. The necks of lions would not be so thick. Were others present to look after them. I kissed his hands, scarcely believing that I had escaped death, in comparison with which I found the loss of my eye insignificant. So I found the loss of my eye insignificant. So I travelled to my uncle's city and, after presenting myself to him, I told him what had happened to my father, as well as how I had come to lose my eye. He burst into tears and said, "You have added to my cares and my sorrows. For your cousin disappeared days ago and I don't know what has happened to him, nor can anyone bring me news." He continued to weep until he fainted and I was bitterly sorry for him. He then wanted to apply some medicaments to my eye, but when he saw that it was like an empty walnut shell, he said, "Better to lose your eye, my boy, than to lose your life." At that, I could no longer stay silent about the affair of my cousin, his son, and so I told him all that had happened. When he heard my news, he was delighted and told me to come and show him the enclosure. "By God, uncle," I said, "I don't know where it is." I went back a number of times after that and searched, but I couldn't find the place. Then, however, he and I went to the cemetery and, after looking right and left, to our great joy I recognized the place. The two of us went into the enclosure and, after removing the earth, we lifted the cover. We climbed down 50 steps and when we had reached the bottom, we were met by blinding smoke. "There is no might and no power except with God, the exalted, the omnipotent," exclaimed my uncle 1/4 words that can never put to shame anyone who speaks them. We walked on and found ourselves in a hall filled with flour, grain, eatables, and so on, and there in the middle of it we saw a curtain hanging down over a couch. My uncle looked and found his son and the woman who had gone down with him locked in an embrace, but they had become black charcoal, as though they had been thrown into a pit of fire. On seeing this, my uncle spat in his son's face and said, "You deserve this, you pig. This is your punishment in this world, but there remains the punishment of the next world, which will be harsher and stronger."